In the last section, we spoke a little bit about our drivers collection and the different ways that we might need to modify that collection. So every one of these operations over here to the right, we're going to match up an API route to undertake or undergo this particular operation. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by that. On the left-hand side of this diagram, I've got the 4 different operations that we might want to undergo or partake on our drivers collection. We're going to map up every one of these operations to a very specific route and request type that is going to be wired up to our Node application. So if somebody makes a post request to the /API/drivers route, that is going to have the effect of creating a driver in our drivers collection. If someone makes a delete request to API/driver/ID, where the ID is the ID of the driver that they are trying to delete, we will delete the respective driver in our drivers collection. And then the same thing for editing and finding drivers as well. So in other words, the takeaway here is every operation that we are going to undertake on our drivers collection is going to be mapped up to a very specific route or request type, So when I say request type, if that is like mysterious or you don't quite know what I'm talking about at all when I say request type, or if you don't know what I mean by post request or delete or put or get, no problem. We're going to spend a little bit of time now to do a little bit of fundamentals of Node and Express.js and exactly what these incoming request types are. So let's talk about fundamentals of Node and Express for a little bit. So again, I want to just do a quick refresher. We spoke about this just a moment ago, but I want to reiterate the design of our application. We are going to be building a Node Express server, and it's going to take some incoming API requests. So what I really want to focus on right now is this incoming API request. This is the same diagram we were just looking at, but now I've expanded out the API request or the HTTP request. So again, any type of front-end application, it might be React, Angular, iOS, Android. And I'm saying React and Angular, but I really mean just arbitrary JavaScript web application. It could be vanilla JavaScript. It can be absolutely anything we want. All of these different front-end applications that we might build are going to be able to interface with our Node Express server by making HTTP requests to it. So it does not matter what type of front-end app you want to build, it will be able to communicate with this Node and Express server that we're going to put together by making an HTTP request. So let's talk about exactly what forms up an HTTP request and some of the different rules that are around it. The text here is the text from a very real HTTP request. Well, it's not 100% real, but these are some of the properties you might see. So let's inspect a couple of the different parts of this request. On the very first line, we specify the type or the method of the request. In this case, I have post request. There are many different methods of requests, and we'll talk about all the different kinds there are in just one second. After specifying the method of the request, we then specify where the request is supposed to be sent to. So in this case, we're trying to send it to a route of API/drivers. So my expectation would be that we are going to wire up our Express server to watch for post requests coming in on a route of API/drivers. So whenever the Express server sees that type of request coming in, it will look at the request and then take some operation on our collection of drivers to suit whatever the request was. Some of the other interesting parts of our HTTP request are the header section. So that's everything from user agent down to connection down here. The headers of the connection are kind of like configuration options to describe some data about the request itself. The first line, user agent, specifies the type or the type of device that made the HTTP request. So user agent, I could talk about for a very long time. Let's just say it specifies the type of device that made the request. We've then got the host, which is the domain from which the request is bound to. And then a couple others on here that aren't particularly interesting, at least for the purposes of this course. What I really want to talk about is the very bottom part here, the request body. So if we want to send along any specific information with the request itself, that information will be tagged in the request body. So a post request has the implication of creating a new driver. If I want to create a driver, I might need to pass along some data like the email of the driver we're trying to create. So I would pass along that information in the request body. All right, so a little bit of a side on HTTP requests in general. Chances are I'm going to assume that you've probably made an AJAX request or an HTTP request in the past. If you have, you've probably used, say, Axios or jQuery or just raw JavaScript. When you've done that, you have been making HTTP requests that look exactly like this. The benefit of libraries like jQuery and Axios and all those, like Fetch itself, the Fetch API, the purpose of those is that they take care of formulating and producing this HTTP request themselves. So you don't actually have to manually finagle with creating all this different stuff. It's handled traditionally by the browser or by a mobile device for you. But again, I just want you to understand a little bit about what goes into an HTTP request, because it is quite important once we start working on our Express application. Okay, so before this section runs on too long, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about exactly what this request method is and why it's so important for the API we're going to build. So let's talk about that in the next section.